This is Mr. Podliska Module 8, EDL 853. This is my case study, Get This Child Out of My Room. So Category 1, Problem Identification and Analysis. In your analysis of the case, provide examples from what do you know? I know that Schuyler is a K-12 comprehensive school. They have one superintendent who's there one day a week. They have one assistant superintendent in each school who also has a full teaching load. They have a student named Carl. He's got behaviors of self-abuse along with aggression toward his teacher, Nancy. These behaviors have escalated in the last few months since his parents got a divorce. This timeline coincides with his parents' divorce. Then you have Susan, who's a first-time SPED teacher. She's got shared resources and services along with limited supervision. She lives in Monroe, roughly 1 hour from school. The previous SPED teacher was Miss Lewis. She was a real institution of the school over the past 25 years. Then you have Mrs. Nancy Taylor, a veteran 10-year or so teacher. She's had issues with Carl, reported in the 6th week of class. In your analysis of the case, provide examples from what you know. Nancy reported issues to Susan in the 6th week of school. Due to self-abusive behavior, Carl has been placed on a consequence and reward program that had been working priorly. Nancy reported behavior, sharpening a pencil and then throwing it at her, and wanted Carl taken out of her class. In conversation, Nancy reported several other behaviors as Susan provided suggestions. So to me, it sounded like Susan would provide a suggestion and Nancy would say, well, oh, well, but he also did this. So that is kind of concerning to me. Susan called Mrs. Wills, the district coordinator for special education. She advised coming up with an intervention system, taking Carl out of Mrs. Taylor's class when out of control. An IEP meeting was attended by parents, and the root of behavior was assumed, as both parents didn't really take an interest in the child. The mother was very defensive, said she was working 50 hours a week just to make ends meet, blamed a lot of things on the father, and the father wasn't really concerned about much. Mrs. Taylor was frustrated, saying, be like Mrs. Lewis. Susan was disappointed with the results of her efforts. So basically, Mrs. Taylor was frustrated, saying that she needed to be just like Mrs. Lewis, and Mrs. Lewis would have just taken the student out of the classroom without any question, and that was, in her view, supporting the teacher instead of trying to come to the root of the problem and solving it. Susan was disappointed because she put in a lot of time, energy, effort to develop an intervention plan, contacting the district coordinator for special education, coming up with this system, and it was never really given a chance by Mrs. Taylor. What do you need to know? Documentation is the biggest thing. Has Nancy been documenting this behavior? I find it concerning that someone would come up to you in week 6 and say, hey, this behavior happened, I want the student out of my room. If it's a one-time behavior, you don't remove a student for that. If it has been happening over and over again, then why hasn't that been addressed with the special education teacher in the first place? Has the administration been made aware of these behaviors? So have this student been sent to the principal, vice principal, the assistant superintendent? Who's taking care of these behaviors? If a student's throwing a sharpened pencil at somebody, then they're probably going to get sent to the office or something like that. Is there some kind of paper trail documentation providing that these behaviors truly have been escalating? Then you look at evaluation. What does the data suggest regarding the reward and consequence program? So previously, this reward consequence program was said to be working. So why isn't it working right now? Or is it working? Has the behavior actually been escalating? Is Carl really getting worse? Does this timeline go right along with the divorce? Are there some issues there? Then you look at communication. Has Nancy been communicating these behaviors with parents, administration, special education staff? If I had a student in my classroom who's thrown a sharpened pencil at somebody, administration's going to know about it. Parents are going to know about it. If it's a special education student, then absolutely that person's going to know about it so that you have that documentation and you have the things necessary to go through interventions or to pull a student out of a classroom or something like that. Then you look at collaboration. Has Mrs. Taylor talked to Carl's previous teachers? Is Mrs. Taylor the only one Carl sees all day? Does he have specials or anything like that? Are they seeing these same behaviors from Carl? Was this behavior typical of last year when he was in 2nd grade? If not, has she talked to those teachers? Has she talked to the music teacher or the gym teacher or anything like that? Is anything working? Is there some kind of reward system? Does he really like PE? Maybe you keep him in PE on days that he's good. Maybe you take him out on days that he is a behavior issue, things like that. Identifying the problem based on the information in A and B, increasing in Carl's behavior problems. So has that increase occurred, or that increase has occurred? That's the problem. You look at a lack of parental support based on the IEP meeting. I'll sign the paper. You can do whatever you want with my kid. That's concerning from an administrative standpoint. And you look at the new special education teacher doesn't do exactly what the old teacher did. That's concerning. It's not concerning, but you look at it as, when I was a first-year teacher, I came in for a social studies teacher who'd been in the room for 20 years. And, hey, that's not the way he did it. Well, I'm my own person. You're probably going to like some things that I do. You probably will dislike some things that I do. I know coming into administration, dealing with some teachers that I previously taught with, that's not the way it was handled last year. Well, I'm going to establish some of my own rituals and things like that. Also, you look at what accommodations and diagnoses are in the IEP or 504 for Carl. He had previous behavior problems, so I would assume one of those things are in place, or his behavior is manifestations of a disability. So you have to look at that when you look at disciplining a child. Category 2, proposed plan of action with appropriate strategies for implementation. The plan of action should include clearly outlined steps designed to resolve the problem. First, you meet with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent. Get on the same page. Describe the process. What have you done? So you had these meetings with Miss Taylor right away. You had this meeting with the special education coordinator. You had the IEP meeting. You've developed a plan. So you describe that entire process to them, make sure they're on board with it, make sure they're aware of the concerns from Miss Taylor, make sure they know you have the support of the special education coordinator, describe the family dynamics from the IEP meeting and why you came up with the plan you did and how you can justify those steps. Meet with the school psychologist, counselor. Have they had previous interactions? Have they met with? Can they meet with Carl? So, we have school psychologists or counselors available at most times. Carl's obviously had something traumatic happen in his life. His behavior's changed as a result of that. Has he had meetings with these individuals? Next, meet with Carl. I got to build that rapport. So, assuming you're 6 weeks into the school year, I would hope that as a special education teacher, you've met your roster or the kids you're dealing with. You got to build that rapport, that professional relationship. Explain the new intervention process. Discuss the old system and why it stopped working. So talk to Carl. Why did this reward and punishment system stop working? What's going on with you? And then implement the intervention which was developed. Properly document the problem behaviors and the success of the interventions. As the leader, include the appropriate strategies you would use to implement your plan. First, you got to schedule that meeting with the superintendent and assistant superintendent. So start as high as you can. Then you schedule the meeting with the school psychologist, counselor. Develop meeting schedule for Carl to meet with the school psychologist, counselor on a regular basis. Schedule a meeting with yourself. Develop that meeting schedule for you to meet with Carl on a regular basis. Meet with Mrs. Taylor and any of Carl's other teachers to discuss new intervention process and correct documentation practices. Category 3, resolve the issue based on promoting the success of all students. Your decision should be based on the answer to the following questions. What is best for the students? All students need a safe and positive learning environment. The other students deserve to be safe. Carl deserves a least restrictive environment. So that's the best for all students. If he's out of control, then those students need to be safe. If he's under control, he needs to be in there learning in that least restrictive environment. All students need to feel supported. Carl will have many outlets to discuss his feelings, his issues, and his successes. Having those meetings with Susan, having those meetings with school psychologist or counselor. When a teacher feels supported, they are a better teacher. Discuss the plan of action and the meetings that have taken place to get to this point. So you didn't just come up with this stuff. Discuss that process. Discuss meeting with the initial teacher, meeting with the special education coordinator, the meetings you've had with the superintendent, assistant superintendent, the meetings you've had with school counselors and psychologists, the meetings you've had with Carl, and how this is going to be the best option, or the best option to try. Don't I'm not going to guarantee it's going to work, but I'm going to provide you the documentation to say it's going to work or it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work, then we'll try something else. Then maybe we'll go back to what Miss Taylor suggested. She can feel right in the end. You want to meet with Miss Taylor. You want to listen to her concerns, but you want to explain to give the process a chance, and it can be better for everyone. Category 4, debrief the problem by reflecting on what you were thinking, feeling, and valuing, and by identifying issues that are unresolved or open to further investigation. What were you thinking, feeling, and valuing as you responded to this problem? I was thinking that Nancy views support as what's most convenient for her. So it was most convenient for her to have that student removed from her classroom, no questions asked. They can sit in a resource room and learn from a book. That's easy. It's convenient for her. Carl needs positive support. He's got a lot of things going on in his life. His behavior is escalating, and there's a clear-cut reason or supposed reason that it's escalating. Susan is doing a good job using her resources. She's meeting with that special education coordinator. She's trying to set up the IEPs. She's meeting with the teachers. She's trying to do the correct things. So she's doing a good job using her resources. However, if the school provided more resources, then she probably would utilize those and it would probably be more successful. Feeling Carl is seeking attention that he isn't getting at home. The school district has a lack of support for first-year teachers. So Carl's acting out in class because he wants attention. He's not getting any at home. Also, you have this first-year special education teacher who has very, very little support. She's doing the things that she knows and that she's learned, but she is not very well supported. The first person she should have gone to, in a situation where she's dealing with a teacher who's concerned is, do you have a mentor? Skipping, you don't have to go higher up if you can start with somebody low and get some advice from there. And then valuing the needs of every student. So every student deserves to be safe. Every student deserves that least restrictive environment. The need for collaboration between all to promote the success of all students. So they need to work together. The leadership in place, the superintendent needs to, make sure he's appointed good assistant superintendents, and he probably shouldn't have them teaching a full class load if they're going to be the most effective sub-administrators for him or her. And then you fall below that process. So that collaboration needs to occur between them, the special education teachers, the regular education teachers, the previous teachers. So you talk to those second grade teachers. Okay, Carl does this. Okay, now I can address that. How did you work through it? What issues are still unresolved or open to further investigation? How can the school district better support first-year staff members? So developing mentoring procedures, policies. What processes are in place for documentation? Throughout the entire case study, it just comes up over and over. Where's the documentation? This behavior is number 1 out of 6 weeks, and then you're throwing out all these other random behaviors when she's trying to justify the fact that she's not going to take him out of your room. The first time he does something, well, there should be a paper trail. That I should be able to clearly say, okay, well, in week 1 he was doing this, in week 2 he's doing this, week 3 he's doing this. Yes, it has escalated, and yes, we might be to a point where we need to take him out of the classroom until we can get him calmed down. But without that clear-cut process and that clear-cut documentation, it's going to be very hard to do. Is the superintendent once a week assistant superintendent with a full class mode and effective model? I talked about it a little bit earlier. To me, that's not a very effective model. You got to have availability for those higher ups, and if that higher up is only going to be around once a week and that assistant higher up is only around when really, really, really needed during those other times, then it's not going to be a very effective model. How can emotional needs be better supported in this school district? Talking about that school psychologist, counselor. He's got all these things. Carl's got all these things going on. Has it been addressed? Has anybody talked to him about that? Category 5, reflect on Standard 2 by providing evidence that you as the educational leader promotes the academic success and personal well-being of every student by enhancing instructional capacity. Component 1, how did you as educational leader promote the success of every student by enhancing instructional capacity? You have the LRE, a least restrictive environment, is a research-based practice which promotes learning. So that least restrictive environment for Carl is vital. At the same time, you want to provide a safe learning environment for those other students. With the intervention, Carl's behavior will hopefully improve, which will enhance classroom instruction. However, if it does not and he is removed per the intervention, it will still increase the instruction for those still in the room. So as opposed to if he blew up and he stayed in the classroom, then you might lose 20 minutes of instruction. But if he blows up and he gets removed from the classroom, the rest of the class can still function for those last 20 minutes. That being said, if it's a 45-minute class and he blows up 25 minutes into it, well, Carl's received 24 minutes of instruction. So that's a positive. He wasn't taken out of that classroom for the entire class period. Also, properly documenting behaviors and successful interventions will benefit future students and teachers. Instead of just throwing them into a resource room with a book, documenting behaviors and interventions and procedures that actually work will benefit those future students. Anybody with a behavior issue similar to Carl's in the future, you could follow a similar kind of intervention. Also benefits the teachers because you're providing them with support, getting that student out of their classroom for 20 minutes when they need to, or something like that. How did you as educational leader promote the personal well-being of every student by enhancing instructional capacity? Carl's interventions allow him to be removed or remove himself when a stressful situation is caused or may cause frustration. This promotes his well-being emotionally as well as the physical well-being of classmates. Carl's supports allow him to express his emotions and could lead to finding the root of the outburst. Meeting with school psychologist, counselor, along with Susan will promote his emotional well-being. Then you have less outbursts in class will allow Carl to make new and more friends and create a better environment. How do you as the school leader enhance instructional capacity? Listening to Mrs. Taylor's concerns and convincing her to give you the opportunity to try it your way. Try to make it sound like her idea. The more you can do that, the more ownership you're willing to give up and make it sound like her idea, then awesome, because she's going to totally buy into it. Building a collaborative team between the general education teacher, special education teacher, special education coordinator, school psychologist, counselor, assistant superintendent, and superintendent. That collaborative team is going to be imperative. Creating a model for developing interventions, documentation, data collection, and using the data for analysis of progress. So taking the model that maybe it was the special education coordinator who gave it to you, but a model that wasn't there before. The model before led to one step, and that was removing the student from the classroom, putting them in a resource room with a book. So that's not a model. Then you have developing a mentoring program to help support those early or first year educators or administrators or any role. Thanks.